back in the quiet corner. I'm now living back in Mansfield. And so my heart is still here. And and I first of all want to thank Chris Pitts. I hope you all know what a treasure this man is. He has done more to unite our part of the state than anyone I can think of. And his skills in terms of the kind of data we're doing now, I mean, we're a much more sophisticated bunch than we were just a few years ago. Kudos to Chris for pulling this together tonight and all that he does for the entire Democratic state. I also want to mention that, people keep thinking I'm leaving. I'm not leaving till the end of the year, folks. So I will still be here on the job through the 2022 election. And my team is still in place. They're wonderful. I can't say enough about them. I think Scott Bates is on tonight. And I just want to mention he is my deputy. Incredible resource for all of us. Again, an Eastern Connecticut guy from Stonington. So you have a voice in our office, and we will continue to try to do everything we can to make the 2022 election as successful as the 2021 was, honestly. I have to tell you right now, democracy is in great peril. And you need to take this job of Secretary of the State very, very seriously now, more than ever before. We are the front lines in holding the line on security of our elections, the attacks, the misinformation, the disinformation, the downright lies that are being told right now about our elections. I just got off a national call with the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI and other law enforcement agencies. And the attack of the Russians on Ukraine has made this all the more imperative that we have secretaries of state who can stand up for democracy. So with that being said, I'm going to be very short tonight. This is not my meeting. I'm thrilled that we have so many great candidates for Secretary of State. As long as it's a Democrat, I'm fine, because we have to continue the work we've been doing. I think Connecticut has been a bit of a beacon in some ways for the rest of the country. We do the best practices, we do all the cybersecurity management that we need to, but you must be aware that the issue this year for this race is the mistrust of elections. And unless we can bring the public back to believing that elections have results that you can trust, we are done as a country and a democracy. I believe that profoundly. So I would just say, when you're listening to people and thinking about who that next person is, that you think a lot about trust. I think that's the word I would focus on, because whoever it is must be someone that everyone can trust, not just Democrats, by the way. I think it needs to be someone who can carry forward the message that we have tried to carry, which is that everyone is welcome. Everyone must be voting. Everyone should be accommodated to the extent that we can. And that Connecticut is all about empowering people and moving it forward. We are now the only state that is advancing democracy and making it easier to vote rather than more difficult. There was an article in Politico just last week about that fact. So let's continue the tradition and look carefully and listen carefully. But I would ask you to think about that as you regard these candidates, although there are many other jobs that this office does, but right now, this is the imperative. So thank you very much. I'm trying to stay out of all this. It's killing me, but this is an important election. So please give it your full attention. I'm really glad so many people have tuned in tonight, because it is a moment that we all need to pay attention to this office. So thank you. And thank you to the candidates for stepping up to run for this very, very important position this year. There's no more important time to be involved in elections. So, and thank you to everyone, by the way, who has supported me all these years and made all this possible, because without you, it wouldn't be. So thanks, everyone. I'm going to tune out or tune in and kind of listen to what everybody says. I've heard a number of the candidates speak already, but we can't go wrong really as Democrats. So That's my hope for all of us. Thanks. I'll turn it back to you, Chris.
Thank you, Denise. So, just a quick point of personal privilege. I have been a Secretary of State junkie since I first got involved in Connecticut politics, even before Denise, but became a bigger one thanks to Denise. And I'm glad that you all have caught up with me. And it's amazing. We've got over 80 people already. 140 people have registered for tonight for the Secretary of State's race. We have 6 incredible candidates that are all putting their name out there to run for this office. Everyone, I think, gets how important Secretary of State's office is. So, with that point of personal privilege over, I'm going to turn everything over to a good friend of the Quiet Corner, Arunin Arulampalam. You might remember him from the treasurer's race a few years ago, or his time at the Department of Consumer Protection. He is now the CEO of the Hartford Land Bank, and I try to convince him to run for office every time I talk to him. So, with no further ado, I'd like to turn everything over to our friend Arunin.
Thank you, Chris. That was a very kind introduction, and let me just say it is so great to see so many familiar faces here. The turnout for this Zoom candidate forum on a Monday night is incredible, and just a testament to the really special people in the Quiet Corner who are engaged and involved every single cycle. To the leadership, and I'll second what Secretary Merrill said. Chris, it's every part of the state should be so lucky to have a Chris Pitts. And it's so good to see all of you. I can't wait to see all of you in person one day, hopefully very soon, hopefully at a Quiet Corner event coming soon. But I miss you all, and it is great to see you. And I'll just also echo briefly Chris's words to Secretary Merrill. I think the reason we are all here is because we know that this is an incredibly important race in this time. And also because we've had the nation's best Secretary of the State for 12 years. And so to Secretary Merrill, the work you've done in the state and continue to do from this voter and for all of us, we're so grateful, and thank you for that. So we are going to turn this over to the candidates in a moment. We are going to give you each 3 minutes for your introductions. Then there are going to be 3 rounds of questions in which you will have 2 minutes apiece. And finally, a lightning round in which there will be it'll be simple yes or no questions, or in one case, just a number, but quick questions to close it out. We ask that you don't make comments about any other candidate directly over the course of this. And as your time is coming to the close, you'll see Charles up there with a card to let you know that it's coming to a close. And so I'm going to start by introduction, by reading the bios of the candidates we have, and then we'll let them do introductions. We are going to go in a randomized order. Chris kind of organized this so that nobody goes first or last in every round. Chris, I hope you are like a fantasy football league commissioner or something, because this is a very impressive organization of names. So I will call out your names in each order in which you're going to present. I'll start with the bios and then let you do 3-minute introductions. But just so you know who we have with us here today, Matt Lesser is a state senator from the 9th District, serving the residents of Cromwell, Middletown, Newington, Rocky Hill, and Weathersfield, and Deputy Majority Leader. He's a chair of the Insurance and Real Estate Committee and Vice Chair of Human Services. He's in the last session, he worked with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund to introduce the Connecticut Voting Rights Act and led the passage of legislation that provides prenatal care to every woman in Connecticut, health care for all children 8 and under, and a year of postnatal care, all regardless of immigration status. Hilda Santiago is a state representative from Meriden. She knows what it's like to get involved in the political process while finding a balance between family, work, and life. After working 3 jobs to make ends meet, Hilda first got involved by successfully taking on Meriden's education system when her son, who has special needs, wasn't getting the education he deserved. Now in her 5th term in the legislature, she serves on the Government Administration and Elections Committee, leading on the front on critical voting initiatives like early voting, no excuse absentee balloting, the comprehensive version of the Connecticut Voting Rights Act. Josh Elliott is in his third term in the Connecticut House of Representatives, representing the 88th District in Hamden. He serves as chair of the Higher Education and Employment Advancement Committee. After successfully championing a bill to provide free telecommunications for incarcerated people and their families, he's now swiveling his attention to pushing ranked choice voting, voting for all, and expanded ballot access. Stephanie Thomas is a small business owner who spent 3 decades advising and problem solving for nonprofit organizations. In 2020, she was elected to represent Norwalk, Wilton, Westport, and Westport as a state representative, flipping the seat from Republican to Democrat for the first time in over a decade. As vice chair of the Government Administration Elections Committee, she sponsored and helped pass a variety of voter-focused bills such as automatic voter registration and resolutions to advance early voting and no excuse absentee balloting. Mirza Bond is the current director of public health for the city of New Haven, where she oversees hundreds of employees and a multi-million-dollar annual budget. She's a New Haven native who has spent her career in public service. Mirza is running an exploratory campaign with a focus on Secretary of State to use her experience making government work for the people to revamp the office and make Connecticut a national leader in voting rights. Sorry, Rob Simulcare. I wasn't sure if he was on. Rob is a Harvard-educated attorney who has worked for 6 Democratic presidential campaigns to protect voting rights. As Governor Ned Lamont's appointee as chairman of the Connecticut Lottery, Rob led the effort to modernize the state's gaming industry, including legalized sports betting. He's a former executive at ESPN and NBC Sports and is founder of the media startup called Persona Media. That is our slate of candidates for tonight. As Secretary Merrill said, it is an incredible slate, and we look forward to hearing from each of them. I'm going to give you 3 minutes each for your introductions, starting with Representative Hilda Santiago. Hilda, I think you might be muted. Muted again.
Try it again. You had it off for a second. All right, let's go ahead. Why don't we move to the next candidate, and we'll let Hilda get her microphone set, and we'll add her.
Yeah, our next.
There she is. We got
There
it.
it is. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you, Arunan, and thank you, Chris Pitts, and the rest of the folks that are here today to listen to this conversation. And that's what I call it. I call it a conversation. Democrats should stand shoulder to shoulder on protecting the rights to vote. And that's what we're all here for, to work on a way that we can protect our rights in the state of Connecticut. I started getting involved when I had to fight for my son and advocate for him to get his services in the Meriden Board of Ed. I was really impressed with the process at the Board of Ed, and that's how I got on the Democratic Town Committee. I was on the Town Committee for 17 years. So as a Town Committee, I understand the work that is behind when you're nominating for a candidate, and all the work that it takes to put something together, and also fundraising. I have professional experience. I have been a Head Start director, director of a shelter, and even worked in healthcare and also in housing. I have been now deputy director for Senator Chris Murphy in his office for the last 15 years. And that has been an experience in itself, because you're also helping people, and when people call, they are talking to someone that they can trust to solve their issues and also give them the resources. I was also 8 years on the city council before I became a state rep in 2012. And that in itself has been a different experience, being a state rep. I am also, as you had mentioned, a member of the GAE committee, where all the election bills are passed. And that's where Secretary Denise Merrill does come to and speak to us. And thank you, Denise, for being here today also. As an inspiration, that's one of the reasons why I also decided to run for state rep. I think it's time that voices like mine are part of the conversation on voting rights, especially. I know what it is to live in underserved communities and the place that needs more representation. I am one that works in the community. Community outreach is very important. And you have to be able to work in a community where people can trust you and they know who you are and they see you at events and they see you door knocking and they see you becoming part of the Mid-State Chamber. They see you as a person that they can come to and you can solve their problems. So I know what it is to be able to gain trust with folks. And I can also work as a state legislature. I have also worked with both sides of the aisle in order for to get bills done and to get bills passed in the legislature. I sit on the finance committee. I was vice chair of that committee at one time. I've been on the GIE committee. I've been on the insurance committee, the banking committee. Those are the committees that I have sat on in the last 10 years. But I also am also the highest ranking woman in Latina in the chamber, now in the General Assembly. And that comes from working as a leader through the years in the last 10 years to get to where I'm at now. And that's because the leadership has entrusted in me in order to work with our colleagues in the chamber, but also to make sure that votes are being taken. And I'm kind of like the one that has the whip to make sure that everything gets done. So I would also, I can bring I also, like I said, I have a combination of personal and professional experience. And my 3 priorities at this time would be to get early voting across the finish line, work on the absentee ballot bills that should be coming up in a couple of years, and also communication. That's security, technology, and communication. Communication, I think, is one of the most important things, especially working with the registrars and voters. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Hilda. Next up, State Senator Matt Lesser.
Thank you so much, Arun, and it's so great to see so many friends on here to be back virtually in the quiet corner. And I will say, just as a testament to Arun's own personal integrity, he and I have been friends for a long time. I met him when he was an intern in the legislature, and despite everything, he would not sneak me the questions for tonight. And I'm an upstanding guy. And I just want to say something special about the Quiet Corner Democrats, because I see people on this call who I've known from all over the place, but also people from way outside of the Quiet Corner. And I think it's a testament to, the incredible organization that Chris Pitts has built up, also Sherry Vogt, and all the other people who've been working to make this a real powerhouse of political power, making the Quiet Corner the center of Connecticut. And, it's a real success story. And I know it's been tough the last few years. In a lot of places we've lost ground as a party, but we are more organized than ever before, thanks to their work and their leadership. And it's great to see so many folks on here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Senator Matt Lesser. I've been serving in the legislature since 2009. I'd worked for Senator Obama before then and got elected, defeated a longtime Republican. And I got elected in a purple seat. And I have held on. I got elected to the state Senate in 2018 as an underdog. And I know how important it is to build the Democratic Party in places where we don't necessarily have a natural strength. We have to work a little bit harder. We have to make our case. We have to do what Denise Merrill said at the beginning, which is to sell democracy. Too many of our Republican friends and neighbors are losing confidence in the ballot box as being the place where we settle our differences. I mean, we see in the most stark and literal possible way an attack on democracy happening right now when we turn on the news, when we watch what's happening in Ukraine. And I was just with a group of Ukrainians right before this. We know that democracy is under attack, and we have a lot of work to do to sell our democracy, to make it happen, to make it real. And I just want to say how grateful I am that we've had Denise Merrill for the last 12 years, leading the charge. I've worked with her every step of the way on every major voting reform in the last 12 years. And thank God, when Denise ran 4 years ago, I don't know if anybody knew what she would have to deal with. She had to deal with the Russian government trying to hack into Connecticut's voter registration database. She had to deal with conducting a free and fair election in the middle of a global pandemic. And not only see people have the right to vote, but thanks to absentee ballot drop boxes and working with our incredible town clerks and registrars, we saw a record increase in voter turnout. And then she had to deal with this new threat, this new problem that we've never had to deal with before, which is what on earth do you do when a candidate for the highest office in the land refuses to accept the outcome of a democratic election? What do you do? And this is the challenge that's going to face not just us as a country, but us going forward for the next 4 years. So happy to talk more about that, and just want to thank you for having me on.
Thank you, Matt. Next up, State Representative Stephanie Thomas.
Thank you, Arunin. Thank you to everyone for being here tonight. The Quiet Corner is not quiet, and I love it. I am running for Secretary of the State as one of only 2 declared Democratic candidates, because this is the job that I want, and one that I think my background in the nonprofit sector as a business owner and my more recent role in government have prepared me for. With everything going on in Ukraine right now, I really have been focusing on how I really have embodied the American dream. My father was illiterate. He could barely read. My mother had her GED, but I grew up in a socioeconomic level where, you know, my high school job earnings usually went to pay our rent. I put myself through college at NYU, graduating on the dean's list. And in my first job out of undergrad, I learned that public service and the public good was my passion. So I went on and got a master's in nonprofit management. While I was in grad school, I started working for a fundraising consulting company, started as an intern for a 3-week project, ended up becoming the company's president, and I left there after 19 years and started my own successful company where I really had to create a vision of doing things differently and then following through on that vision. I've been a consultant for 2.5 decades. And in that setting, I have learned that I cannot pass the buck. I have to diagnose and actually solve problems. I've served my community in leadership roles on boards, on my DTC, the Norwalk Zoning Commission, and against all the odds and quite unexpectedly, following the election of Donald Trump, I entered the political arena. And in 2020, I flipped a red district blue, becoming only the 2nd Democrat to ever hold that seat. Obviously the first Black person and the only person from Norwalk. And I've done all of these things with honesty, integrity, tenacity, and a sense of humor for those of you who know me well. And I just believe that in a world where insurgents stormed our Capitol, to overturn the results of an election, and distrust in government across all political parties is at an all-time high. I think these are actually the attributes that I will bring to the table and that Connecticut needs so that I can foster a greater interest in civic education and civic engagement, that I can extend a hand out to the town clerks and registrars and chambers of commerce and community groups and get people more involved, and the same skills that will be needed to implement all of the great voting reforms that we've already passed in the legislature. So I'm applying for the job because I'm passionate about transparency and efficiency in government and about serving as the voice of the people. So hopefully you'll join me on the journey.
Thank you, Stephanie. Next up is Rob Simmelcare.
Thank you, Arunin. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me, everyone, Chris and all, for organizing this. I want to introduce myself to you all because I'm sure I'm new to a lot of you. My name is Rob Simmelcare. Arunin is one of the few people who can pronounce it correctly in the state of Connecticut, so thank you for that. I'm from Westport. I grew up in New York City and New Jersey, moved to Connecticut in 2014. And as I had done in New York and previously in my life, I immediately got involved in politics. Before I came here, I had gone to Dartmouth College where I was a government major. My first Connecticut life work really was as a young reporter at WFSB in Hartford. I worked as an intern there. Then I went on to law school at Harvard. And when I graduated Harvard Law School, I went on to work for a couple of big New York law firms. But one of the first things I did was get involved with, at the time, it was the Al Gore campaign for president as a voter protection attorney. And the reason I did that was because growing up as the son of two African-American parents, my mother, she was from Danville, Virginia, which was the last capital of the Confederacy. Jefferson Davis spent a couple of nights there before the end of the Civil War. Grew up in segregated schools, and I heard stories from her mother and her grandmother about voting in Virginia in the 30s and 40s and 50s and what that was like. My great grandmother, Rosa, she used to put money aside every week from her paycheck so that she'd have enough every November to pay the poll tax that they had to pay in Danville, Virginia to vote. And I'd never heard of a poll tax when I was growing up as a young kid. And I really came to understand what the poll tax was. It wasn't just another way to raise money for the local schools or to build a swimming pool. It was primarily a way to keep Black people from voting. And voting meant so much to my family that they made it a budget priority to be able to pay that poll tax. And so I realized at a young age that voting was something that was both precious and often something that had to be fought for. You know, that the so-called right to vote has really always been a fight to vote everywhere in our country. So when I graduated law school, I signed up to be a voter protection volunteer for the Gore campaign. I've now worked as a voter protection attorney for every single Democratic presidential candidate since then. So fast forward to my time in Connecticut. After practicing law, I was an executive at ESPN in Bristol, at NBC Sports, always doing political work on the side as a DTC member in Westport, as a state central member. In 2020, Governor Lamont, who I'd gotten to know through the campaign period, asked me if I would take my business and my business knowledge and my experience as a lawyer to the Connecticut Lottery, where they needed someone to run the ship of the board of directors. The lottery had had issues, scandals, problems over the last couple of years that many of you are probably familiar with. I came in to take on that role to really do two things: to get lottery, which is one of the biggest generators of revenue in our state, back on track, and to help lead the process of expanding gaming in our state, including introduction of sports betting and other forms of online gaming, which have a significant economic impact, especially in the southeast corner of our state. And so in a year and a half's time, I've been able to accomplish both of those things. The lottery is on much more solid footing, record revenues last year. And of course, you all know that we were able to successfully expand gaming while also making significant contributions to combat problem gaming as well. So what does it have to do with running for Secretary of the State?
Thank you, Rob.
I know I'm out of time, so I'll get to all that when I have a chance to speak later. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Rob. Next is Maritza Bond.
Good evening. It is such a pleasure to be here before all of you. And like my fellow opponents, I will be remiss if I did not count it a privilege to be able to be here this evening while the people of Ukraine are fighting for their very freedom. And I stand in solidarity with that. And yesterday had the privilege to have a prayer service with the people of Ukraine in the city of New Haven. I want to thank Chris Pitts for organizing the Quiet Corner Dems to be able to hear us this evening and be able to share why we feel where should be the best candidate to run for Secretary of the State. It is my hope that I can set myself apart and be able to highlight my background and experience with all of you this evening. Arunan, I would just want to thank you also for hosting us and also for our timekeeper this evening. And just a little bit as was highlighted in my biography this evening, each of us go into public service because something typically motivates us. And for me, it was my childhood that motivated me to consider public health when I was a young age. My grandmother actually raised me, and I was very proud that I had extended family members that really worked closely in supporting me as well as my community to ensure that I worked my way through college and be the first one in my family to be able to accomplish such. And I don't take it lightly. And although the city of New Haven served as my baseline to be motivated to go into public service, I actually dedicated an entire decade of my career working in the quiet corner of Connecticut. I actually had an office in New London County and Windham County and had a statewide interpreter program where we worked closely with every single healthcare sector across Connecticut. And so for me, being able to see firsthand a lot of the needs and problem solving and knowing the importance of working with grassroots organization is something that I have been able to do successfully. Most importantly, being in the front lines in the last 2 years as the health director, working to fight and to against the misinformation that our government at the federal level at the time created. And so why am I exploring a run for a Secretary of State? I'm exploring a run for Secretary of State because I see a problem and I see a threat to our democracy. And I want to be able to ensure that voter suppression is not something that is going to happen in our state. I want to make sure that we continue to protect our democracy. I want to still continue to support businesses as I currently do in my role. I want to ensure that they have a platform where we can be a public facing office and make sure that we continue to also support local registrars and town clerks. And so it is my hope that I will be able to, through the round of questions, be able to highlight my background and my experience and demonstrate how my skills can transfer to be the next Secretary of the State. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maritza. And the last introduction is from Josh Elliott, State Rep from Hamden.
All right, thanks for having me. So I grew up in the Shoreline, grew up in Guilford, ended up going to Ithaca College. That was my undergrad degree, graduated with an emphasis on criminal justice reform. Since then, I moved down to Virginia, worked on a campaign down there, got crushed, moved back, decided wasn't gonna do politics. Went to the family business, which is a little natural food store my mother opened 25 years ago. Went to law school at Quinnipiac Law, which is what brought me to this house about 12 years ago in Hamden. Graduated, became an attorney, never practiced, opened up my own small business in Shelton called the Common Bond Market. I co-own and run both businesses with my mother. A couple of years go by. I get very active on the Sanders campaign. After a year of organizing around the state, Working Families Party approached me, asked me if I would primary the Speaker of the House, Brendan Sharkey. Ultimately, I said yes. He goes into early retirement, so it was me against the next in line. Right place, right time, right team. I won my primary 60-40, won my general 60-40, win both re-elections 70-30. And I'm in my third term right now. I'm the chair of the Higher Education and Employment Advancement Committee, passing my major piece of legislation last year, which took 3 years to accomplish, making Connecticut the first state to make telecommunications free for people who are incarcerated, making us go from the most expensive state to now the first state to free. So a little bit about who I am. In a race of 7 Dems, I will jokingly say that even if I think that I'm the best candidate, doesn't matter, still not better than a coin flip. So I'm going to push policy here as I do everywhere else around the state. Been pushing these 3 things for the last 6 years. I'm going to push them here tonight. First thing, ranked choice voting. I think it's better for a number of reasons. You vote for who you want against who you don't want. No such thing as a spoiler candidate. Races are more congenial. There's actually a benefit to saying nice things about the people around you because you don't get a benefit for bringing everybody down. You actually want to be somebody's second favorite. Downside is takes a little longer to tally the ballots, and we would need a regionalized system, unfortunately, because all the ballots need to go to one place. That's the first of 3. Also, to be clear, New York City, Maine, Alaska, 36 municipalities around the state have implemented this. While it's new-ish, it's something that is gaining traction. The second thing is following the footsteps of the criminal justice reform work that we've been doing in Connecticut, we ended prison gerrymandering. We passed the Clean Slate Bill. We passed the legalization of the recreational use of cannabis. We also passed a bill that allows people on parole to vote. I want to follow in the footsteps of that, which is to say that Maine and Vermont never stripped the right to vote away from people 70 years ago when you become incarcerated. We've gone from 18,000 incarcerated people down to a low of 9,000 people. My feeling is that goes above and beyond what this ought to be, what punishment ought to be. So what I'll say is this: for telecommunications, we said, we're not looking just to reduce recidivism. We're looking to ensure people are successful upon reentry. How do you do that? Make sure people stay connected. You stay connected through telecommunications, but you also stay connected through the political process. I think this is really important. Lastly, my take on the vote at home issue. The model I'm pushing for is what Colorado, Oregon, and Washington do. 7 states total do this, simply to say 3 weeks to 30 days out to vote. opt-out versus opt-in, meaning that you don't apply for a ballot, you automatically receive a ballot every single cycle. And lastly, you have much better automatic voter registration, working with the United States Postal Service, working with the Electronic Registration Information Center. Because I'm a business owner, because I'm an attorney, because I'm a three-term legislator who chairs a committee, I think I'm a good fit for this position, and happy to answer the future very quick answer questions.
Thank you for that, Josh. This next round is not yet the lightning round. We're going to do 2-minute responses initially, and with 3 rounds of questions. I'm going to start with Maritza Bond. The first question is, how can you work to increase voter turnout and registration? To the extent your answer requires passing new legislation, what would be your approach to passing that legislation?
I think for me, I have given that a lot of thought because, as you know, a lot of people are just not civically engaged. And it is crucial for us to determine a number of ways that we can be able to get individuals back out to understand that their vote actually counts. And when they vote, they have the power to hold legislators, like the ones running, accountable. And each of us that are in public service accountable. So for me, education is critical to engage. And through that, we have to engage at the youngest level to ensure that we have equity across our education system on civic engagement. We also need to ensure that we are going to utilize social marketing strategies like traditional media and social media on educating people on accessibility around voting, how to navigate voting, and where to go, when to vote. Also, we need to ensure that we're working with our grassroots organizations that are also getting the vote out and getting education campaigns out. And that should be convened by the Secretary of State's office, working, convening with local grassroots organizations as such. And so for me, it's really not a top-down approach. It's really working with the community and for the community.
Thank you, Maritza. Next up is Rob Simulcare.
So the first thing we need to do if we want to increase voter turnout is stop being one of only 6 states in the country where the only day you can legally vote formally without an excuse is Tuesday of Election Day every November. So that's why I'm making early voting my #1 priority as I consider this run. As folks know, I think most people on this call, there is a ballot initiative this fall that will, if passed, give the legislature the ability to amend the Constitution to allow early voting. It is crucial that that passes. And I have said consistently that if I run and I'm the nominee, I will make passing that amendment as much a priority in my campaign as getting elected as Secretary of the State would be. Because frankly, I think being Secretary of the State isn't going to be a very interesting job if that ballot initiative does not pass. We cannot continue to lag behind so many other states when it comes to ballot at the ability to vote and times you can vote. Voting, Election Day is on a Tuesday because landowners in the 1700s wanted to make it hard to vote. They didn't want to make it easy to vote. And so we're still in Connecticut living with that vestige, and we're one of only 6 states that does that. Secondly, of course, I think we need to make the no excuse absentee voting that we've had the last couple of cycles because of COVID something that is permanent. I think that's something that is clearly in the legislature's domain to do something about for this coming cycle, now that the governor has given his executive powers back. But that's something that needs to happen. There's a multi-step process that needs to take place. But that is another priority that I think the next Secretary of State has to really focus on, is making that permanent. And then thirdly, yes, there's clearly an education and PR side of this that has to happen all the time. Parties and candidates all have to do the work of getting people to register, getting people to want to vote. But we've got to make it easier for them to actually get to the point of being able to cast a ballot. That's why early voting and no excuse absentee are by far the biggest priorities that I would have.
Thank you, Rob. Next up, Senator Matt Lesser.
Thank you, Arunan, and it's a great question. First off, I've already been doing the work to try to increase voter turnout for the last 14 years. But we have an incredible opportunity this year to pass the early voting constitutional amendment. To, as Rob just said, we have to expand absentee balloting. I don't know if how many people realize that the expanded absentee balloting that people came to rely on in the 2020 election and then the municipals last fall has expired. And we as the legislature need to act decisively to put that back into effect. We've come to rely on our drop boxes all across the state. But we also have to go beyond that to make sure that a vote in Brooklyn, Connecticut counts just as much as a vote in Bridgeport or anywhere else. And that's why I introduced the Connecticut Voting Rights Act to try to bring consistency and one system of elections. I love our system of local control, and it's great in many ways, but making sure particularly that we are protected from having one rogue official really interfering with our elections, I think is really critical, so we can address the task that remains ahead of us. And that makes sure that we have consistent information out to voters. One last thing I would say, I just met with a bunch of town clerks this morning, and they were pleading with the next Secretary of State, please do a better job of making sure that we can get information out to voters, so that we're not just relying on registrars and town clerks to get information out about how you vote by absentee, how you vote, when you vote, when elections are. The Secretary of State has an incredible public-facing opportunity to educate the public, to get information out about voting procedures and elections and ballot initiatives. And that, I think, is something we have under-resourced over the last decade. And I think we now have a tremendous opportunity to invest in the Secretary of State's office, provide some real relief to our frontline elections workers, and help build a democracy.
Thank you. Representative Stephanie Thomas.
Thank you. Like with so many things, it's not one size fits all. We have to roll out a lot of different strategies simultaneously. A couple of new things. I know when I've gone to the Secretary's site, information about voter registration is available in English and Spanish only. And in a community like mine, Haitian Creole is a primary language. These are simple things that we could do to make more people feel part of the system. The Secretary's office, I think, has an opportunity to also be a convener and meet with groups and talk to them and sort of trickle down interest in civics so that some of these community groups can then go out into the community. And in terms of early voting, like my colleague, Senator Lesser, I've certainly been doing this work all along. We have a really good chance to pass this in the fall if we all work at it, and that will do a tremendous amount to increase voter turnout. No excuse absentee ballot, same thing. But in addition to the constitutional amendment that we'll vote on in 2023, there are actually two bills in the legislature this session that would also seek to extend the COVID excuse for absentee ballots and also to make another tweak. And there is a public hearing on Friday at 10 a.m. on both of those bills, so please sign up. And then automatic voter registration, a bill that I introduced last year, is we voted yes, but the next secretary has a lot that needs to be done to actually roll it out. And if we can get AVR online in all of the agencies that we allowed for it to get online, that would do a lot. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you, Stephanie. The next one up is Rob Simmelcare.
I already answered this first question.
I'm sorry. Next one up is Representative Josh Elliott. I'm keeping track of the list here.
No problem.
All right. So I did two things last year that I think were fairly foundational in terms of how I'm doing this election. The first is that I was a moderator in Fairfield, and the second is that I was in Colorado for a few days to watch how their elections transpired. And so I'm trying to answer specifically the idea about passing new legislation and the approach to doing so, because the important bit to understand is that these constitutional amendments are simply permissive language changes, and everything will go back to the legislature. So we need to be talking right now specifically what we mean when we say early voting and how early out. And we need to know how we're going to do the automatic voter registration. And we need to know what the system is going to look like. Again, going back to the opt-out versus opt-in. What being a moderator meant to me was that simply I understand how difficult this work is. And to Matt's point, the folk that do this work, the clerks and registrars around the state, are underfinanced, under-resourced, underappreciated. They're demonized and villainized because they don't get the support that they need from the state. And ultimately, that's because the registrars and clerks and Secretary of State's office, historically, over the course of decades, end up being somewhat combative because we have a lot of good ideas at the Capitol, but registrars and clerks around the state don't feel that they're being brought to the conversation. Not everyone, but many do. And my feeling is, wearing my management cap, the first thing you have to do is allow the progression to be led by registrars and clerks. Because the fact is, we got about 5 years before we can even do anything. With the constitutional amendments and the legislative process, and then the actual administration of all of this, it's going to be a while before we actually see a lot of these things become permanent. So what do? We bring Roe back into the room. We bring the clerks around the state into the room. We say, what are the iterative changes we can make from cycle to cycle? Because what I saw in Colorado was city clerks and the Secretary of State's office every year use this iterative process to fix what they have going on now, go to the legislature as a unified team, and that's how they bring the resources back that they need to ensure that they can do the jobs well. Because ultimately, if we don't, as a state, provide the resources to go into the future and be into the future, we're not going to get there.
Thank you, Josh. And finally, on question number 1, Representative Hilda Santiago.
Well, I just want to say, I don't want to repeat a lot of what has already been said, but I think that in order to pass this early voting referendum for November 22nd has to start now, not wait until it doesn't pass. This is the second time that it's already been in a referendum. So we have to make sure that the communication, the public service, that people are being in tune as to why the change is so important. Because if we don't change the state constitution, that's not going to get done. So we have to make sure that the grassroots is from the bottom up and not from the top down, because the people in the community are the ones that are voting. So we have to make sure that we give them the orientation, the information that they need in order to make an informed decision on the referendum. So there's a lot of work that still has to be done. And that's why it's important, because as was mentioned, we are one of the 6 states in the whole country, plus New Hampshire, that doesn't have early voting. And as progressive as Connecticut is, we're still not that progressive. So early voting is very important. And I have those relationships in the last 10 years to work with my colleagues and legislators, both in the Senate and in the House, in order to bring that bill to fruition in the next couple of years. So you have to have those relationships. You have to have that trust with your colleagues, and you have to have that trust with your registrars and your town clerks, and you have to have a public hearing. So we need to hear what the community feels about it. We have to hear everyone, and everybody has a piece of the pie. So this is all inclusive, and we have to make sure that this goes before the legislature next year, because if we don't do this, we might not have another opportunity. As far as no absentee ballot, that's not going to come out for another 2 or 3 years. It may be 4 years, but I think early voting is the most important, because it gives everybody the opportunity, especially people that have 2 and 3 jobs that can't take the day off and go vote.
Hilda.
So that's what we need.
Thank you, Hilda. I'm going to move on to question number 2. We've heard a lot about voting, but obviously that's not all the Secretary of State's office does. I was wondering if you could speak to, starting with Josh Elliott, can you speak to any plans for the Secretary of State's office to make doing business in Connecticut easier?
Yeah, so we just migrated a bunch of data over from the Concord system to basically a Salesforce background. The data migration actually went pretty well. It was about 4 or 5 months ago. And the feedback that I'm getting from people generally is that they're much happier with the way that the site looks and with the way that they interact with it. I will say that there will always be work to do in terms of streamlining the process for people that are just getting into business. I know for myself, being in business for the last decade with my mother, we do interact with the site, but it's really just business filing. The problem is for people that are starting a business, trying to navigate government and trying to create a one-stop shop for people that they can figure out all the different bits of paperwork that they need to do from all the different agencies or governmental entities. I think that has to be the continuing work of reaching out to new business owners, figuring out exactly what roadblocks they faced and doing whatever we can to create as few impediments as possible. That to me is the goal, because when it comes down to it, that is the only thing really that Secretary of States can do, is that filing side. Because if we're talking about what it is to make Connecticut a competitive state, whether it's the taxes, whether it's what laws are in place, that actually does not have a lot to do with Secretary of State's office. So it is a very narrow bit of work that we can do, but also really important.
Thank you, Josh. Next up, Hilda Santiago.
Hi, one of the things that we need to do in the small business unit that the Secretary of the State has is to make it easier for people to register and for them to understand how to navigate the system. Going throughout the state, I've heard issues about the UCC, how that's red tape, how that is very cumbersome to a lot of the small businesses. And I think that we need to make it easier for people to register with the Secretary of the State. I have spoken, I have been part of the chamber in Meriden for many years, and they always see that the Secretary of the State is more able to have access, whether it's in English or Spanish, but it's you also need someone that is going to answer the phones at the Secretary of the State that's going to speak their language, and that's very important. And that's the way you're going to get a lot of businesses involved, because most businesses now are minorities and women. And those are the ones that are the backbone of the economy in the state of Connecticut.
Thank you, Hilda. Rob Simmelcare is next.
So in addition to launching a small business myself a couple of years ago, I've also had a chance to interact with a number of the 3,000 Connecticut lottery retailers around the state, most of which are small businesses, mom and pop businesses, convenience stores, things like that. And so I've had a chance to hear from them, what is it that makes it easy or hard to do business in Connecticut? And when it comes to the Secretary of the State's office, one of the first things I do hear is the red tape, right? How much they have to do in terms of filing reports, the frequency of it, a lack of understanding exactly what they need to do when, especially as Hilda said, for minority-owned businesses, of which so many of the lottery retailers in particular are recent immigrants, minorities, female-owned businesses as well. So I think a priority for me really is cutting down on the red tape, to the extent possible, really reducing, or if possible, eliminating fees, especially for minority and women-owned businesses, which I think need our help. They need resources and assistance to make it easier for them to succeed. And I also think from a technological point of view, we clearly have made progress. Governor Lamont, Secretary Merrill have done a nice job of relaunching that platform, but there's still no mobile app that you can use to do business with the state. So much of what happens now on the internet is done with a mobile phone, yet there's really no good mobile solution for business owners to use. So I think those would be some of the focuses. It is hard enough to succeed with a small business. We need to lower fees and red tape as much as we can, and then really just make sure we're giving minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses every chance they possibly can have to succeed.
Thank you, Rob. Maritza Bond is next.
Thank you for that. This is something that I have been giving a lot of thought and speaking to businesses across Connecticut as well. First and foremost, I will be remiss if I did not commend Congressman Joe Courtney, who has advocated at the federal level and voted for federal funding to improve Connecticut's business infrastructure. And it's my hope that when I declare for Secretary of the State, I will be able to have the opportunity to work with him on implementing on the allocations of those funds. The Secretary of the State's office is chronically underfunded. It's causing many delays and a lot of cumbersome issues with the businesses at large and small businesses. I will fight to end the cycle of underfunding by restoring the laws of protecting the funding for the Secretary of the State, which is called the CRD funding. The office brings nearly $40 million each year, but that money is taken by the legislator. In turn, the office receives just a small percentage of that to be able to do the work that needs to be done. By submitting legislation, I will be able to protect the funds that the Secretary of the State brings in, so that I will be able to secure the needed resources to upgrade infrastructure, improve customer service, and step up cybersecurity. Two major things that I would like to do in that office is to reinstate the small business unit that Lieutenant Governor, when she was the Secretary of State, had in place that supported women and minority owned businesses, as well as a legislative bill by Carolyn Simmons, who was supporting and advocating for the one-stop shop for businesses to try to centralize and streamline and improve the way that we operate businesses in Connecticut. So it is my hope that I will be able to accomplish that when I declare a run for office. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt Lesser.
Thank you. The Secretary of State's office is the first point of contact for anybody trying to do business in the state of Connecticut. And that is an incredibly important, first opportunity for us to show who we are as a state. Now, Denise has done incredible work. The business.ct.gov, that's our new business portal at the Secretary of State's office, is great, and you should all check it out. But there's a lot more that we can do. And building on what Maritza was just saying, if you go to New York, there is a one-stop shop for anybody trying to set up a business in New York City. And you can navigate to where you get permits, you can access where you file taxes. There is one website. But unfortunately, in Connecticut, that has been held up by politics. We've got 87 different agencies that claim to be the point person for any small business. And so you've got Department of Revenue Services, you've got Department of Economic and Community Development, you've got the Small Business Development Center. Politics is holding this up. And so making sure that the next Secretary of State is ready on day one to cut through red tape, knows how to pass legislation and move progressive change meaningfully through the legislature is really, really critical. And lastly, we need more data on Connecticut's economy. I think that's one of the things that we really struggled with in state government is getting good quality data. And we can do a lot more. I've talked to data scientists at UConn who say we are really leaving a lot on the table, not making sure that our Secretary of State's database is talking fully to our other state databases so we can get data out to economists so we know where our state's economy is working and where we need to provide some extra support. So I think that's leaving a lot on the table. And I think this is a really good question because I think not many people realize that the business side of the Secretary of State's office is the largest single part of the Office of the Secretary of State.
Thank you, Matt, and Stephanie Thomas.
Thank you. A lot has been said. I will say as a business owner, I think the MyConnect rollout a few months ago has been extraordinary. There's a decision tree situation set up so you can enter what you're trying to do. It gives you all the taxes, what you need to do around your employee filings, all the regulations. So yes, every computer system can definitely use tweaks. In terms of fees, those are set in statute, but I think with the Secretary's office, I'll focus on a couple of things I think they could be doing for businesses. They are a clearinghouse, basically the repository of a lot of business data. So they could play a real role in pushing out that data or, being the front-facing portal to help push out information to businesses. Information from DECD, information from the SBA, various information that businesses could use in terms of becoming minority-owned, woman-owned, et cetera. They have that data. Another good example, they could be conveners. I remember back a long time ago under Governor Malloy, there was a convening held with the Department of General Services, SBA, the Secretary's office to match business. It was a matchmaking event to match large businesses with smaller businesses. I know as a legislator, I was able to go to the Secretary's office, ask for that business list, and create a monthly mailing to businesses where I could share resources that were helpful to them. So there's a lot more that could be done with that data that I think businesses would benefit from instead of it just being solely a repository. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. We're going to move on to the third and final question of the long form question round. And I'm going to start with Matt Lesser on this one. Matt, can you talk about how you'd want to have your office work with the Secretary of State's office, work with the Registrar of Voters Association of Connecticut?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. And, I think at times there's been this conversation in the past where, we had the local election workers, whether it's registrars or town clerks, versus folks in Hartford. And, there's a push pull. You're trying to make us do stuff, but you're not giving us the resources. And I think there's been this like poisonous at times relationship. And I don't think we have that luxury anymore. I mean, we saw on January 6th that we're all in this together, that our democracy is under attack. We cannot take for granted the fact that democracy is just going to happen in a small town in Connecticut. We have to make sure that we're supporting our frontline workers, making sure that we are protecting them against harassment, intimidation, threats. I have not talked to somebody who works the polls who has not been on the receiving end of this idea that they're the deep state. So right now, Connecticut is sitting on the largest rainy day fund in state history. Our bond rating is through the roof. We are now able, for the first time in my legislative career, 14 years, to be able to invest in things that matter. And you know what matters? Our democracy matters. And that's why we really need to make sure that we're providing resources to our registrars, to our towns, helping show this system of elections is really something that we value as a state. A budget is a moral document. I think this is a time for us to invest in our local election systems, invest in the people who make our elections happen. And that will show that this is not just a soundbite, but something that really is important to us. Look, our over the next 2 years, we're going to see a real crisis. And so it's so important that as we go forward, we make sure that whoever's there is ready to start the job on the first day on the job. Everything else is important, but that I think is really, really critical.
Thank you, Matt. Josh Elliott.
So this again is just wearing my management cap, that whenever managers come into the businesses, the first thing I say is, if you have a vision for what you want to do, definitely elucidate that vision. But really the first step has to be working with the people that are there day in, day out, and that are actually making the business work. Figuring out from them what the problems are and helping them with their problems first to get the buy-in from people. And the fact is, I take that same headspace for this, is that whoever comes into this position, I think that if you go in telling registrars and clerks what they must do, and you certainly have an incredible pulpit by being Secretary of the State and being able to push legislation through that building because you're there day in, day out working with legislators, you can pass legislation, but the issue is implementation. And if the people that are actually going to be administering the system that we're creating have problems with the system that they're administering, it's going to be really an issue, getting it over the finish line, but then also creating what we want. And so my feeling again is that it's 5 years out before these things come into place. It is a very slow build up to this. And that is the time where you work on the problems that we have right now. Yes, you bring Roback in and you bring the clerks in. You let them lead the conversation with the knowledge that there is a certain vision that you're trying to create, but you give them the resources that they need first before you go to do anything else. Because I think that as a political bloc, nothing is going to be stronger than the Secretary of State's office with registrars, with clerks, if they're all working in tandem. And the only way you do that is by getting the buy-in first, by building those relationships, by being around the state, by being on calls, and by letting them guide where the office pushes at first.
Thank you, Josh. Hilda.
I think one of the most important things is communication. The clerks and the registrars should be the first ones that are finding out about new laws, new legislation. They should be finding about what the federal rules are, what the state rules are, what the mandates are, what the mandates are not. And you have to have that trust with them, and you have to be a good listener. You have to really listen to them and find out why are they happy? Why are they not happy? And there is a legislative committee that it was the Connecticut Association of Town Clerks and Registrars that meets every 6 months. I plan to have that meeting every other month, every 2 months, until I get to know them well. I plan to visit every town because that's important, because even though we have 169 towns and everybody votes and there's participation in voting, everybody has a different system of how to carry out the vote for that particular election day, how they store voter ballots. Everybody has a different way. And we have to figure out that there's got to be a way that we could do it all in sync. We have to improve the technology in these offices, and the state should be paying for that. It shouldn't be coming out of the city budgets. The state, if there's mandates, the state should be paying for that. We shouldn't put the burden on the cities, because when we put the burden on the cities, that's when their mill rates and everything goes up. I know I was on the city council for 8 years in Meriden, but we have to be good listeners. We have to give them the right training ahead of time when things are changing, when laws are changing, and we have to get the feedback from them. So I plan to meet with them first. And one of the other things that I'm planning to do also with the registrar, we got to start mentoring young people to take over these jobs. We got to start working with the youth. We have to be able to also make it easier for people that have disabilities in order to make it easier for them to come in and vote instead of having to vote from home. Because a lot of people do like coming to City Hall or the church or the school in order to vote. So I think that would be one of my first things, to meet with the registrar of voters.
Thank you, Hilda.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hilda. Next up is Stephanie Thomas.
Thank you. One thing I know, I'm sure Rovac is very concerned about, because I know a lot of local registrars are, is the incredible amount of turnover they've seen over the last few years. So people who have served as registrars for decades have now retired. And I know there's a bit of concern because these jobs are so incredibly detail oriented, and the best registrars have been doing it for decades. So when something like redistricting comes along, they know how to roll out those new maps and get all that data settled. So I think we have to look at training, and there is a certificate program, but I think we could work to make that a little more robust through the secretary's office, so that hopefully some of the more experienced registrars can help mentor the new people coming into the role. And as was already mentioned, definitely listening. I don't know any human who does not want to be listened to, especially when they are the ones closest to the problem. Our registrars are the front lines of our elections, and without them, we can't do very much, and we can't do it well. So like many of my colleagues have said, I too feel we have to go out to the registrars, convene them, and really figure out the best way to incorporate what they know from doing the work into all the great legislation that has passed, because everything we talk about at all of these candidate forums will land on the desk of a registrar or a town clerk. So we need to learn from them how to implement.
Thank you. Next up is Rob.
Thank you. So at the federal level, there's something that's actually been banned by the Supreme Court called an unfunded mandate. When Congress passes a law that requires the states to do something that costs money, but then doesn't actually allocate the money needed to do that thing. And so that's been essentially banned at the federal level. And I think we need to see, in part, the relationship between the Secretary of the State's office and Hartford in general and the registrars and clerks as a similar thing. You can't ask them to do something without giving them the resources they need to do it. So I think that means, for me, the answer to this question, ultimately, how would I want to work with the registrars, is one word, which is collaboratively. There's got to be a give and take. There's got to be listening, and I would convene a conference of the registrars and clerks right out of the gate to hear from them what are the issues they're facing when it comes to keeping the rolls, when it comes to counting the votes, when it comes to technology, the machines that are being used in the towns to actually vote, as well as the technology being used to keep the rolls. I know there's a lot of frustration out there. I know that there's been controversy regarding the roles of the registrars and clerks, and to me, those things come about when you just don't have the level of communication that you need to understand what people want and why they want it. And you have to make decisions at the end of the day, and not everyone's going to be happy with decisions. But I think if people feel heard before decisions that affect them are made, then at the end of the day, it may not be the decision they hope for, but it's a decision they'll respect and get on board with after the fact if it was a good process. So that's my management style. That's the style I've used in all of my management roles, including at Lottery. And it's the role I would take to this as well.
Thank you. And finally, Maritza.
Thank you. Yes, this is something that I have also been thinking about, and I think it's really critical. We know that ROVAC has supported and take a stance on many issues in the past at the legislature, and I would love to have a partnership and collaborate with them to advocate to refund the CRD for the Secretary of the State so that we can be able to support the infrastructure that is needed for local registrars as well as town clerks. And I also would like to ensure that they serve as part of my advisory group. One of the things that I want to put together is an advisory task force that will be able to provide and lend their voices on the ways that we can best implement the policies that are being set forth, because we can't push policies from the top down. We need to make sure that those that are going to be implicated by the policies have a voice to lend so that we can be able to ensure a successful, streamlined, and standardized method across Connecticut, regardless of size and city of town. And so I'm looking forward to working with ROVAC in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are going to move on to the lightning round of questions. I'm going to ask you all to answer these questions in one word. Most of these will be yes or no questions. The first one will be a number. And then following this lightning round, you'll each get 3 minutes for closing remarks. So I'm going to start with question number 1. If early voting passes, how many days prior to the election would you like to see it start? We're going to start with Rob.
Somewhere between 7 and 10. 10 is the number I've had in my mind.
Thank you. Hilda.
I would say 3 to 5 days.
Matt.
7 to 10.
Stephanie.
Escalation, start with 3, get up to 2 weeks.
Maritza.
7 to 10.
And Josh.
21.
Thank you. Second question, would you support setting standards for the wages of election workers? We're going to start with Stephanie on this one.
Yes.
Matt.
Yes, and the funding to pay it.
Maritza.
Absolutely.
Rob.
Yes, plus the funding.
Josh.
Yes, with the funding.
And Hilda.
Without a doubt, yes.
Great. Third question, would you suggest Connecticut investigate ranked choice voting? I'm going to start with Hilda on that one.
Yes.
Josh.
Yes.
Rob.
Yes, although not a priority.
Maritza.
Yes, with provision.
Matt.
Yes.
And Stephanie.
Eventually.
Okay. And the final of the lightning round questions, do you support the use of poll books to electronically sign in voters? We're going to start with Josh Elliott on that one.
Yes, in conjunction with paper as well.
Great. Maritza.
Absolutely.
Stephanie.
Yes.
Matt.
Yes, with a paper backup.
Hilda.
Yes, I would say with paper backup too.
And Rob.
Yes, with significant testing and a paper backup.
Great. Well, thank you, guys. That is our lightning round. We're going to move on to closing statements. And I'm going to let Stephanie start the closing statements.
Thank you. This was fun. So the Secretary of State's job is so wonderfully diverse, as we've already heard tonight. But I think the job is about vision and also the skills to execute on a vision. And I believe I'm well equipped to do that. My business background, my nonprofit background, my legislative background, I think are all skill sets that will be necessary to get us through this current environment, which I think we've all agreed is not a place where we want to be as a nation, and certainly not here in the state of Connecticut. When militants are overthrowing our capital, our population has little understanding of how our government works. And when apathy is often winning more elections than our political parties, that's not a place where I want to be. And I think my vision that is perhaps a little different from what the secretary has talked about in the past is really one about civic education and engagement. We definitely have some programs for kids, but adults are left out of the equation. And I think when no entity is responsible for civics, it has slipped through the cracks. I would love to stand up a program that focuses on children and adults, because I firmly believe that when people understand how something works, they're more likely to trust it and to get involved. My vision is also that the government has to invest in its electorate. I've never lived in a state where information was not sent to voters as a matter of course to inform them about major things like redistricting or ballot questions. I will certainly lobby as secretary for additional resources to ensure that our election system and our staff are best in class and voters have the information that they need in order to actually exercise their civic responsibility. And as I've already said, my vision is to really convene and speak with those closest to the problem, whether it's voters, town clerks, registrars, chambers of commerce, small business development centers. I want to ensure that anything that we propose and anything that I would bring to the legislature as secretary actually works for the stakeholders. And you can't do that by sitting in an office. And I'm trained in how to execute on a plan. And as I've said several times, the secretary has so many things on her plate already. And the next secretary will have to pick up the ball and run with it, whether it's implementing automatic voter registration, making recommendations about early voting and no excuse absentee voting. And as Secretary Merrill said, disinformation is the biggest problem we're facing. So I look forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, for those taking notes at home, that was Stephanie Thomas, State Representative from Norwalk and small business owner. Next up is Maritza Bond, the Public Health Director from the City of New Haven.
Thank you, Chris, Pitts, and all of the Quiet Corner Dems for putting this together. And thank you to Aranan for hosting, and thank you to all the candidates for participating. After almost 20 years of my career in public health, I have decided to explore a run for office because I see a problem that needs to be fixed, just like I saw a problem growing up in the city of New Haven with all of the different social issues. And I want to be able to be given the opportunity to continue to protect our democracy. And while I may not be new to politics, I am far from new to knowing what makes governments work. We're going to have to fight for this democracy, and I want to be able to lead, just like I led at the front lines with COVID, and being able to gain trust from the community to be able to protect themselves and their families. My experience of managing hundreds of employees and managing multi-million-dollar budgets, and my ability to adapt to deal with crisis brings me as an individual that can do a lot of coalition building and implementing from the grassroots level solutions. And I want to be able to solve problems so that we can be able to bring that to Hartford. I will argue that public health does not have an alignment. I feel that the field of public health is the same around empathy, compassion, and knowing how to educate people, and weaving public service together can allow the transferable skills for me to be able to be given an opportunity to be in Hartford. So it is my intent to declare in the near future, and it's my hope that I can gain your support. So please stay in touch. My contact information is in the chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maritza. Next up is Rob Simulcare, the Chairman of the Connecticut Lottery and a Sports Executive.
Thank you. Our democracy nationally is really at a major turning point right now. I think we have all seen that in the last couple of years. I think we saw that on January 6th of 2021. We've seen that in the raft of anti-voting laws that have passed all around the country since that day. And we are seeing that in the run-up to the 2022 cycle, in which large swaths of the Republican Party refused to acknowledge the fact that our president was legitimately elected because it is not in their political interest. So I never thought I would see a day like this. I have been on the ground, on the front lines, helping people cast their votes in places like Texas and Georgia and Florida and Virginia. And there's nothing more satisfying than helping someone vote. There's also nothing more frustrating than seeing that right to vote denied. And so that is really what moved me to consider running for this office. As frustrated as we here are in Connecticut about what's going on in places like Georgia and Texas, we're unfortunately not in a great position to say much about it because we're way behind those states. We are way behind Texas when it comes to the days of voting that are available. We're way behind Florida when it comes to mail-in voting. So we have to get our own house in order if we're going to speak out about the unfairness and the injustice of what we're seeing around the country. That starts with passing early voting. It continues with no excuse mail-in voting. And I believe that, again, if I choose to run, I'm the person who is most able to do that. If you want a hard job done, you should turn to someone who's done hard jobs before. Passing sports gaming and expanding gaming in our state is something that was at a complete loggerheads. No one thought we would get that done in our state. Governor Lamont put his trust in me and others to get that done. I was able to get that done. There are big things here that are frankly far more important. I'd love to make it as easy to vote as we just made it to bet in the state of Connecticut. And I say that somewhat facetiously, but I mean it. So we need to get moving when it comes to voting rights in our state. And I look forward to working with all of you to make that happen. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. Josh Elliott, State Representative from Hamden.
Thanks, Arun. So when I first got elected, I had just come in from having the headspace that I was going to be primarying the Speaker of the House, working on the Sanders campaign, coming in with advocates and labor, and having a really combative mentality. And my first 2 years wasn't really all that successful. I helped create the Progressive Caucus. I was very vocal on a whole host of progressive issues, but it was a tough cycle. We didn't have the numbers in the House and the numbers in the Senate that we needed to really get stuff done. And colleagues who I trust came to me and said, hey, if you build some relationships, you're going to be a lot more effective. And so for the next couple of years, I really spent a lot of time building a lot of relationships in the House, in the Senate, people who are more moderate, people who are conservative in the party, and people who are in the other side of the aisle. And that's when things started clicking and I began to really be able to push legislation. And there's a major learning curve to the political work, and I am committed to continue to improve the way that I do the work. And the nice thing about this run for Secretary of the State is that the oversight of this area of government coincides completely with work that I've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years, whether it's ranked choice, pushing for voting rights for people who are incarcerated, really expansive vote at home legislation, again, following the model of what other states do. When I say 21 days, it feels out there as a comparative versus the other candidates, but this is not out there in terms of what states that have incredibly high turnout rates do. And so I take the headspace that because I am committed to improving the way that I do the work, continuing to push progressive policies and politics, be easier on the people than I had in the past, and continue to build coalitions across the board. Because I have the legal background, because I've been in business for the past decade, recognizing both how to run an organization, but then also the way that businesses in Connecticut interact with the government. And because I'm a 3-term legislator who chairs a committee and really gets the legislative process, which I think is also incredibly important to anybody who takes on this role, That's why I'm in this race. That's why I think I'm a good fit for it. I will say that I think because I'm pushing ranked choice voting, and will say that I'll happily be anybody's second favorite. I think that we have an incredible slate of folk here, and it is nice to see all of us pushing very, very similar issues, and that's incredibly gratifying. So thank you all so much for having me, and this has been wonderful and a very tightly run event. So congratulations to Chris and Arunan. You have done a really nice job with this.
Thank you. State Representative Hilda Santiago from Meriden.
Thank you, everyone. And first, I want to thank everyone that took part in putting this forum together. It was well put together. And the Quiet Corner is an area that is beautiful, very concise, and they know what they're doing. So I've worked, is working with in Senator Murphy's office. I've worked with Dorothy Grady. I've worked with Sherry in many issues at the federal level and also at the state level. But I think that I have the quality of bringing people together and bringing people to a consensus. There is no I in team. We have to work as a team when it comes to working with the town clerks, working with the registrar of voters, and I've been in that position working with them at City Hall. I have worked with legislators to bring bills across the finish line, and that's what I want to do with this position as Secretary of the State. And we have to work as a team. You have to be a good listener, and you have to be able to trust people as they come with you with issues that you can resolve together. It's not always from the top down, it's from grassroots. Working at the DTC and being a member of the DTC for 17 years and being involved in the community has taught me that you have to be a listener and you have to work in collaboration with not only the nonprofits, which I've worked in many nonprofits, but also with folks. You have to be able to work with the youth, get them in as ambassadors and get mentors for them, because we need to they're the future of our country, of Connecticut. And we have to be able to make them secure and trust the system enough for them to come out to vote. You have to give them a reason to vote. Misinformation has been out there for many years. People that have been involved in politics for many years, there's always been misinformation. When you run a campaign, I think we had a past president that knew how to deal with it. And he knew how to redirect one sentence and talk people into believing that they needed him. But that's not the way it works. So we have to be able to combat that. The social media has brought out more misinformation, has brought it to the top. And people were looking for something in politics that wasn't there. And that's our fault. That's our fault as Democrats, that's our fault as Republicans, because we were not able to work with people and really believe in people. I want to be the person that will hit the ground running when I become Secretary of the State. My committee is official now and it's not exploratory. It's the one position that I was running for. And I believe that someone like me, which is representative, not only as a woman, but as a person of color, to make sure that people will come out to vote, that they can trust somebody that is there for them. I've been able to do that at the city council. I've been able to do that at the local level, and I've been doing that as a state representative. So thank you.
Thank you, Hilda. And finally, Senator Matt Lesser from the 9th District.
Thank you. Thank you, Arun, and thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone. Look, we're all Democrats for different issues, for different reasons. Maybe it's because I'm a cancer survivor and a new father, but my issue is healthcare, and it has been for as long as I've served in the legislature. I'm the chair of the insurance committee, and I've been able to pass an enormous amount of legislation. The law that I wrote, capping the price of insulin at $25 a month. That's the lowest cap in the country. Just went into effect on January 1. Wrote the law giving kids, every kid in the state, prenatal care, making sure that we transform our healthcare system with telehealth, and that mental health parity goes into effect, so that if you have a substance abuse issue or mental health need, and that's such a critical issue in the pandemic, it gets treated just like any other part of the body. And I've had to do that to pass all of that legislation and a lot more. I've had to do battle with the most powerful special interest in the state of Connecticut. Whether it's healthcare or in the environment or women's rights or workers' rights, whatever makes you a Democrat, it occurs to me, and the reason I'm so focused on this office, on the office of Secretary of State, is because nothing else that we care about as Democrats matters if we don't have our democracy. My mom grew up in a dictatorship, and her mom, my grandmother, grew up as was a refugee when she grew up. She escaped the Holocaust and was able to find refuge in South America. And I want to make sure that my son grows up in a vibrant, successful democracy. I know how much we have at stake in this election. And I think it's easy to think that these issues don't matter to us, that Connecticut is somehow walled off from the problems of the rest of the country. But we've seen this increasing radicalization in places like the Quiet Corner. We used to have moderate Republicans, folks like Tony Guglielmo and Michael Caron, but check out Ann Dauphiné. Check out some of the tough folks, Dan Champagne, who are now representing your part of the state. And we are in a real inflection point where we have to decide who we are as a state and who we are as a country. Look, you should support all of us. We're all working hard. We're all going out to town committees every single night of the week. I go to 6 a night sometimes. Help us qualify for public funding. Help us reject special interests. Help us stand up to the attacks on democracy that we're seeing in this state, and make sure that Connecticut can lead the country, as we should, by having the strongest, most inclusive voting laws in the country. I have a lot of ideas about how to do it. I know my colleagues, my friends do as well. We have a real opportunity this election to make sure that our state's democracy is in good hands going forward. And I just want to thank you for your stick-to-itiveness, your ability to sit through so many folks who agree on so much. And I'm hoping we can build a stronger Democratic Party and a stronger state's democracy in the future. Thank you.